Hi guys, here is the 2-6 lesson, proving angles congruent. The first thing that we are going to talk about is the vertical angles theorem, which is actually something that you already know. It basically just says that vertical angles are congruent, and we already knew that. So in this picture, angle 1 would be congruent to angle 3, and angle 2 would be congruent to angle 4. That's the main thing we're going to be talking about today. All right, here we see a proof of theorem 2.1, the vertical angles theorem. Just take a moment to read over that. You don't need to do this proof actually, but it's just how they are showing that vertical angles are congruent. Okay, so in problem 1, we're going to actually use the vertical angles theorem to find the value of x. So thinking about what we already know, vertical angles are congruent, and so we can set up an equation, 2x plus 21 equals 4x, and from there, we're just going to use algebra to solve this. So I'm going to subtract 2x from each side, bring the baby to the mama. I'll get 21 equals 2x, divide each side by 2, and you get x equals 21 over 2, or you could say 10.5. Let's try another one. So once again, I've got vertical angles. We know vertical angles are congruent, and we can set up an equation. 3x equals 2x plus 40, and from there, we just literally solve the equation. You guys have already done stuff like this, so this should not be anything too challenging. We come out with x is 40. Here on problem 2, we see another proof. This is just using the vertical angles theorem. Again, just take a moment to read over this. Any of the proofs that we'll have to do are the ones that I would say with the training wheels, where we'll just be filling in some of the blanks, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So here on the got it, it's another vertical angles theorem proof. I did have this worked out, so take a moment, read over that, and you can kind of see the different statements with the reasons. This is just written out, again, all of the proof. The statements, the reasons are in the parentheses. Okay, on this page, what it's showing us, guys, is that there is such a thing as a paragraph proof. It's not as common as what we've seen. Usually we do the 2-column proofs, but there is something called a paragraph proof. It's right here. Instead of listing it in 2 columns with the statements on the left and the reasons on the right, now they're just writing this in complete sentences. So again, take a moment, read over this. We will not really be doing paragraph proofs. All right, guys, here we have the congruent supplements theorem. Basically what it's saying is that if 1 and 3 are supplements, now remember, supplements mean the angles have to add up to 180. So if 1 and 3 added up to 180, and I always like to put numbers in here. If 1 was 120, then, or sorry, if 3 was 120, then 1 would need to be 60. And then they go on to say that if 2 and 3 are supplements. So now that would mean that 2 has to be 60 as well to be a supplement to 3. 1 and 2 are congruent. This shows a paragraph proof of the supplement theorem that we just took a look at. Read over that. All right, here we've got basically the same theorem, but this time they're talking about complements theorem. Remember, complements mean they add up to 90. So here they're saying if 1 and 2 are complements, again, I like to put some numbers in there. So if 1 was 40, or sorry, if angle 2 was 40, 3 would be 50. Let me fix that. And actually, let's change this. Let's make angle 2 50, 1 would be 40. That adds up to 90. And then they go on to say, well, if 3 and 2 are complements, so now look at 2 and 3. If 2 was 50, 3 would be 40. Therefore, you're getting that 1 is congruent to 3. Congruent complements theorem. Okay, we have a couple more theorems, guys. This one is, I always say it's like such a common sense theorem. They're saying that all right angles are congruent. They actually needed a theorem to say that. Remember, a right angle means that it's 90 degrees. congruent means that they're equal. If angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles, that means that angle 1 is 90, angle 2 is 90, then yeah, 1 is congruent to 2. And then the next theorem that we have is that if two angles are congruent and supplementary, now remember, supplementary, that means that we're saying that they equal 180. It'd have to be 90 degrees, because if they're congruent, it'd be the same. You basically would just do 180 divided by 2 to get 90. Angle 1 would be 90, angle 2 would also be 90. All right, folks, we're going to wrap up this lesson. We're going to go through a couple of problems just to make sure we have the main points here. On problem 1, they want me to come up with the measures of angles 1, 2, and 3. So for angle 1, I can see that this angle is vertical with this angle, meaning that angle 1 needs to be 90 degrees. For angle 2 is vertical with this angle. So angle 2 needs to be 50 degrees. And finally, angle 3 is vertical with this angle. So angle 3 would be 40 degrees. All vertical angles. And that's the main takeaway from this lesson, that vertical angles are congruent. Okay, so just like at the beginning, now we have to find the value of x. We have vertical angles, so we can set up an algebraic equation. 6x plus 16 equals 136. I'm going to solve this. Subtract 16 from each side. I get 6x equals 120. Divide each side by 6, and we get x is 20. Okay, guys, here it is, probably the hardest thing that we'll have to do today, which is a fill-in-the-blank proof. So as we take a look, it says in the given that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. So I always like to mark that on my picture. And what we're trying to prove is that 6 is congruent to 4. So let's take a look. It starts off with the proof saying that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Remember, the first step of your proof is always the beginning. So we always start with the given. From there, it says that 3 is congruent to 6. Well, if I look back at my picture and I see 3 and 6, I know that those are congruent because 3 and 6 are vertical angles. And vertical angles are congruent. We can say that as a reason. Okay, from there, as I look at step 3, I see that the statement is not written in there, but I can tell that the reason is this transitive property of congruence. So what I'm going to do is look at the first 2 steps. If you notice, step 1 says angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, and angle 3 is congruent to angle 6. If I cross off those middle pieces, it will give me angle 1 is congruent to angle 6. That's using the transitive property. The next step tells me that angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. So if I pop back to my picture and I take a peek, angle 1 and angle 4, yes, those are congruent. And the reason I can list is the same reason, that vertical angles are congruent. And then finally, on the last statement, they're saying that 6 is congruent to 4. So let's pop back and look at steps 3 and 4. In step 3, we've got 1 is congruent to 6 and 1 is congruent to 4. Cross off the matching pairs. That's getting me 6 is congruent to 4. And the reason goes back to the transitive property. Okay, guys, that's it. We are done with the lesson. You are now going to work on the homework practice 2-6. I want you guys to do numbers 1 through 10 for me. I will post those solutions in Canvas, so please check for those answers. And when you get done with the practice, you're going to work on the 2-5 through 2-6 quiz review. We have a quiz tomorrow on Friday. Okay, hope you guys have a great day.